Hello everyone and welcome to today's CMS in Touch webinar series. I'm going to hand over to the organisers Carol and Jamie in a minute, but I just wanted to ask you if you can just mute your mics for those of you who have it, and if you don't worry about that, we can do it our side. We're going to be using the oh sorry, I've got a bit of sound in the background here. Sorry about that. We're going to be using the chat today and also the Q&A function. If you have any questions, please answer them, ask them in the Q&A that you'll find at the bottom of your screen, the two little speech bubbles, and we'll be asking the we'll be asking the questions right at the end, but you can pose the questions as you go through. Now we've got a very busy schedule today, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Carol and to Jamie. Thanks very much, Carol. Thanks, Jamie. You can just take your video. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our webinar today. We're calling it Speaking a Secret Language, Challenging the Patriarchy Through Forms of Communication. There's a little bit of housekeeping for us. We're going to be using Padlet. I'm not the best person to describe Padlet, so as we go along, the experts on doing that who are working it will be sharing it with you. We're also going to be asking you to get involved. So there'll be a mobile number that if you would rather not post into Padlet, but send it to our panelists who are going to be using Padlet and some visuals, or WhatsApp and some visuals, you can send it to them. So there'll be more details to come on that regard. Introduction, we're excited to be here. You know the name of our workshop, our webinar today. One of the things that I wanted to share with you was that our aim is really to infuse this webinar with visceral experiences from our daily lives, and that they're hidden and subtle and sometimes explicit ways that our resistance is manifested in the way that we communicate differently. And so we'll have about 5 presentations of about 7 to 8 minutes long, maybe a wee bit longer. And then we'll pull people off stage because as academics, we often get excited about our topics. Then we'll ask you to reflect upon a query near the end. And if you so choose, sharing your thoughts on either the Padlet or in the chat, and we'll open the discussion forum with some inspiration from our design colleagues and visual imagery, and then we'll have some time for Q&A before the session actually ends. The inspiration, wait a minute, you know what? I'm not sharing, am I?
I was about to tell you.
Tech issue 1, we'll take this back. Introduction, I've already given that. Here's our cool slide to start it off. And given the overview, the inspiration and purpose of what we're doing, just a little bit of background on that. What ended up happening was that I posted something on Twitter, and one of our colleagues who is part of CMS in Touch noticed it. And this whole workshop is built upon the rediscovery of this Nüshu script, and you'll see it in the background of our slides, which was written exclusively by women in ancient China. And our webinar today is going to illuminate how women use different forms of communication to resist those dominant patriarchal norms. And we've got experts from a bunch of different disciplines. We've got people from design, we have linguistics, we have English, we've got management, and we have dance. So we're going to ask them to explore different ways that women speak their truths, or how their truths are given to them and how they resist that. Last year, I tweeted that article, as I mentioned, that BBC had written that described the rediscovery, and Arturo from CMS in Touch commented that it would be a great webinar. And so Carol and I took him up on that. And hence, here we are today with doing this webinar with our colleagues from all over. And so we're really looking at how women have experienced language in ways that enables them to challenge and perhaps even change the patriarchy. And in that challenge and resistance, we wanted to step outside of our disciplinary cocoons. And that's the only way that we feel we can successfully change patriarchy. We can't have our voices and strategies confined to silos. So we reached out to some people that we knew and some people who we didn't know from a variety of disciplines whose work intrigued us. And what our hope is that you'll experience that language of resistance in some visceral ways today. So Carol, Elliott, and I are convening this panel. We've got Sharon from management, Tanya, Eliana, and Alexandra from design, Claire from English, Veronica and Stella whose last names I didn't put on there. And from dance, we have Julia. And what we're going to do is we're just going to start it off and ask you to get engaged. We'll be playing with your questions on the side, and we'll convene at the end to have Q&A sessions, but Caroline will be collating them. We're so excited that you're here. And with that, I will turn it over to Sharon, and I will stop sharing screen so that she can share hers.
Carol, could you unmute, please, and put your mic on, put your camera on?
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. The current photograph that I'm showing here of courageous young women discloses my need for activism, certainly at the moment. And I ask that you consider joining the campaign to make misogyny a hate crime in the UK. I want to talk to you today about a not so secret language of Queen Bee related to women in organisations. I'm assuming that people are aware of the language, but I'll explain what it means, how it's travelled, its stubbornness to challenge, and its massive impact on women in leadership and management. I'd like to start by reading the words of a woman who is passionate about bees, the insects, queen bees, Hilary Kearney. As the sole bee in her caste, the queen bee is illustrious. She is unique in her colony. She is vital to maintaining that population. It's often assumed that the queen bee manages the hive like a monarch, bossing queen bees around, when it's actually closer to a democratic system. The worker bees decide when a key decision is made, like a swarm's choice of nesting site. So we have queen bee as illustrious, unique, and democratic. But the queen bee language perpetuates sexism and sustains patriarchy. We've moved from worker bees, drones, and queen bee insects to queen bee syndrome and women leaders and managers as queen bees. If we take Hilary's understanding, then the metaphor as applied in derogatory ways to women leaders doesn't work. Yet queen bee has become an embedded norm in undermining women and sustaining patriarchy. So a queen bee, a woman in authority who treats colleagues more critically if they're women, or a woman who has succeeded but refuses to help other women do the same. Women in authority are vilified by queen bee language for not supporting other women in ways that are not applied to men. The queen bee label is an abusive, sexist criticism. Queen bee language is highly embedded in patriarchal and misogynistic discourse, which positions women leaders and managers as abject, out of place, and basically not very nice women. Translated into queen bee syndrome in 1973 as a characteristic combination of opinions, emotions, or behaviors, and a language describing a woman of authority who doesn't meet expectations in relation to other women. But actually, this language is alive and thriving today. It continues to target individual women to undermine, destabilize, and blames them for not supporting other women without consideration or any reflexivity on the expectations of the language. And what is key here is that there is no alternative for men. Queen bee language is sexist. The language sets up women against women and undermines both women in authority as well as women who label her queen bee. This ensures very cleverly a fragmentation and a lack of solidarity between women. The fragmentation is highlighted as intragender warfare, think catfight at work, and is communicated through images as here, as well as as language. And this isolates women with authority and warns other women to stay far away from power, from leadership, from other women in case they're stung. Because the queen bee is not sweet like honey. She stings when you're least aware. She doesn't buzz with other women. She's a bitch, aggressor, isolator. She's ruthless, vicious, and abuser. This has big impact. As a mechanism of patriarchy, women who are seen to want power are constructed as norm violators. They disrupt gendered and structural hierarchies, and therefore they must be stopped. The language communicates how women in senior positions, often in the minority, are expected to support other women. But when they do, a different penalty applies. And this impacts on women leaders' credibility, identity, ability to do gender well and differently. And basically, the language divides women. It gives us a language for women to undermine women and also to drive female misogyny, which ignores the presence of competition and exacerbates differences between women. There is some resistance to challenge the norm and destabilize the norm by turning around the language and theorizing why this might happen. But rather than focusing on what women do to other women, ask why you think this happens, what's driving it, and how can it change? So the main point is that Queen Bee gives us a language which is sexist and a mechanism of patriarchy. Women also use this language, often unreflexively, and perpetuate Queen Bee. So my plea here is that we stop using this sexist language. The Queen Bee gives us a language to hate women queen bees and therefore to hate women in authority. However, Queen Bee is also an oxymoron. We also love the Queen Bee, and this is shown in the current growth of Queen Bee and bee products globally. There is, of course, another debate around Queen Bee and the post-feminist reclaiming of the Queen Bee label, but I don't have the time here. The Queen Bee label is stubborn. It's been ongoing for nearly 50 years. So who gains from the Queen Bee language and discourse? We have to stop diminishing us. So in using language and images today, I aim to challenge the Queen Bee gendered norm and language. And if I've persuaded you it's sexist as a mechanism of patriarchy to keep women out of power, then we can work together to eradicate the norm. And I'd like to leave you with the details of Make Misogyny a Hate Crime in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. So our slides, our presentation is being recorded, and we'll be sharing the slides afterwards. So you will have that information on Make Misogyny a Hate Crime after the session. Our next panelists, Tanya, Eliana, and Alexandra, are going to talk about their expertise and women's voices in textiles. And they're also going to be giving you some mechanisms to engage through Padlet and WhatsApp, and I will let them and Kat explain that. Thank you so much, and on to you all.
In the Western world, textile languages are usually feminized crafts. As such, they have complex meanings. They can embody practices that subjugate women or the feminine, locating them at the service of patriarchal systems, or they can contribute to subvert gender norms.
During the World War II, for example, European women knitted socks hiding in their patterns secret messages related to the enemy, but they also knitted others to protect their sons and husbands during the winter.
In Colombia, following a tradition that has a strong Chilean reference, the arpilleras, Women who have suffered the internal conflict have created textile pieces that not only document the atrocities of war, but also the healing that has emerged in their material relation with the craft.
As a language, textile craft is at the same time quotidian and extraordinary. It tells stories about who we are and where we come from. It heals and protests. It also calms us and makes listening possible.
Today, we want to think about this with you, taking the opportunity that all of us are in our homes. After this, we are making some questions related to textile craft as a language. As we present these questions, we would like you to try to respond to those questions in two ways.
First, looking at your daily life surroundings and how it is populated with textile crafts. Clothes, garment, linen, carpets, wall hangings, and many others.
And second, by sharing with us a picture of those textiles or of words as well. With this, we want to think with you about what this material language tells about you, but above all, about us.
Please share the picture using the phone number that was given to you a few days ago. You can use either WhatsApp, Signal, or Telegram, or upload it to the Padlet. We are going to paste the Padlet link and the phone number in the chat right now.
Thank you, Kat, for this.
While sharing these pictures, use the number of each question. Having said this, we ask you now to take the opportunity to stand up and walk around your house, searching for material answers to the following questions.
Textile language has a domestic essence. Do you have any threads or yarns and needles at home? Where do you keep them? And what does this place tell about you? Textile language is material. Can you materially decipher this code?
Textile language has a particular rhythm. Have you made something textile with your own hands? Have you ever seen it being crafted? If yes, how are the timings of this making? What place do you think these times have in a capitalistic becoming?
Textile language is sensitive and intimate. Do you remember the smell of a particular cloth? What's the story behind that smell? What is its texture?
Textile language shape us. What do your clothes tell about you?
What clothes do you own that tell a travel story?
What clothes do you treasure have protected you?
Do you have clothes that remind you of someone? Would you say that this someone is a she?
We thank you for your time to wander around your houses and think with us about textiles languages from your homes.
We hope these questions have touched you in different ways.
While we listen to the remaining presentations, we are going to organize your pictures and we will share them with you during the Q&A to continue thinking together about this.
Muchas gracias.
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 I want to go take pictures. I don't want to continue on. I've got my camera. I'm walking around taking pictures. So Tanya, Eliana, Alexandra, thank you so much. I think we're going to get some great pictures. I've tried to send a few along with them. So we'll hear from the textiles group at the end, and they'll kind of share some of the stories of what we've just been taking pictures of as we begin our discussion at the end. Do you have any that you wanted to continue, or do you want us to move on to the next presentation, Tanya?
We can move on.
Next presentation. Okay, so they're going to be collecting stuff, and we will see them again. So with this, I'd like to switch over to Claire, and she's going to be talking to us about her perspective of language from English and in the Red Kitchen. So Claire, over to you.
Hello, thank you everyone, and thank you for this lovely invitation. I'm experimenting with sway, so we'll see how that goes. So first of all, this idea of writing absent history is really pertinent to Michelle Roberts, who wrote In the Red Kitchen in 1990. It's a short novel where she explores how literature can stage and resist patriarchal histories and patriarchal languages. So the reader is confronted with 3 time periods: Egyptian, Victorian, and the late 20th century, and 5 different narrative voices whose identities kind of blur into one another. While seeking to challenge patriarchy, this novel also suggests that it's unable to provide a complete historical recovery of women's voices, chiefly because some of these objects, such as first-hand accounts and archaeology, are subject to curatorial intervention, loss, or displacement. So much of this is related to whose voices we hear from history and how we construct an archive. And this is why I've got this section here on archives. So the choice of what to record is really important. All of this is socially constructed. And what is really interesting as well is how we choose or decide what becomes an archive and what is destroyed. And it's this idea of destruction that really appeals to me. So I want to tell the story of the Egyptian ruler Hatshepsut, who is rewritten in Roberts's novels through the character of Hat, a fictional character. As a historical woman, Hatshepsut ascended the throne sometime around 1473 BCE, and she reigned for about 20 years. She was really unusual in that she was a woman who was crowned a pharaoh. Despite her extensive impact on Egyptian and Middle Eastern society, though, all of the records of her large-scale projects, such as temple building, trade negotiations, conquests, all of these things, these were all destroyed by her successor, Thutmose III, who was her nephew and her stepson. She acted as regent to him as he was growing up. So she was almost lost to history until Howard Carter discovered the temple of Hatshepsut in the late 19th century. And he also found her sarcophagus in 1903. So what interests me is how we read Hat through palimpsests. We have various types of curation in museums, Howard Carter's discovery, and by extension, archaeological discovery, but nothing about this character is unmediated. And I think this is especially relevant to recovering women's histories because Hatshepsut's image, wrought in stone as part of her enduring legacy, including the extensive building work of temples and various other enterprises, all of these things mean that she was strategically overshadowed and erased from history. And this is where one particular comment on Hatshepsut is important. So Joyce Tilsley has said that following her death, a serious attempt was made to deny her existence by physically removing her presence from the historical record. Gangs of workmen were set up at various monuments, and soon her name and the figures of Hatshepsut had vanished. They'd been completely hacked out, often leaving a very Hatshepsut-shaped gap in the middle of the scene. So her obelisks were walled up, her sphinxes and her statues were smashed and torn down. Tilsley says that this is not merely a symbolic gesture of hatred, but it's all about removing every trace of the female king. Maybe because she was perceived as a usurper, or perhaps because she was a woman who assumed the role of pharaoh, but she was obscured from history. And because of this, In the Red Kitchen is really interesting. It reflects really anxiously, I think, upon archival memory. What it does is suggest that the physical object, the written document, archaeology and artifact all crowd around fictional texts. So it's trying to reconstruct a kind of silenced or marginalized history, but it also acknowledges that it's very difficult to recuperate such women-centered narratives, and that this must be partial. Whilst attempting to recover Hat's experience, the novel, as I'm quoting here, only really proves that her voice and her historical artifacts are partly recoverable. So Hat's narrative discusses her temple building project. She references her buildings at Thebes, at Karnak, the highest obelisk ever seen in ancient Egypt. But as readers with a little bit of history behind us, we are placed in the uneasy position of knowing that despite the bombast, reminiscent of someone like Ozymandias from Percy Shelley's poem, Hat's name and her temples are actually doomed to obscurity. They have lain ruins unknown and unacknowledged for centuries. So in reconstructing her, this novel reflects upon what it means to write in the absence of a physical record. As an aside, Thutmose III actually built a bigger temple next to Hatshepsut's, and I'll leave you to speculate about what that means about masculine authority. What Hatshepsut later does is bemoan the loss of her identity as linked with her archaeological legacy. So she says, on the walls, the painted scenes depicting the triumphs of my life have been washed over. Over the doorway, the writing reciting prayers for me has been defaced, half obliterated. On the columns, all the cartouches containing the hieroglyphs spelling out my name have been savagely hacked out. I've been unwritten, written out, written off. Therefore, I am not even dead. I never was. I am non-existent. There is no I. So despite Hat's best efforts, her record is actually erased by patriarchal forces, and in this case, it's her nephew and stepson. The survival of an archive, the evidence that Hat even existed, is entirely eroded by the subsequent process of history. And as the record unravels, so does Hat's language. So this is, I think, a really useful part of the novel, where Hat seems to stutter and unravel at the prose level of the text. She has little ability to be heard or understood across the generations. And this is an example of that from the novel. So she can't actually even articulate her own name. And I think this is really important because her identity becomes an absent presence in the novel, a paradox that I think also reflects the genre of historical fiction. So knowledge is really slippery, language is really slippery, naming an identity is really problematic. So the novel, I think, does emphasize the power of writing in creating history, but it also flags up the omissions in that history and how these are reconfigured and navigated. I think it performs a gendered consideration of how masculine discourses of history have functioned and how men have been history's custodians, determining how a story is told, as well as if it is even told at all. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. It gives us a lot to think about of how women are erased from history. Our next presentation is from the field of linguistics, and we promised you tattoos, and you'll have some tattoos. So with that, I would like to invite Veronica and Stella to share their slides and have a conversation with us about their work.
Okay, just give us a minute so I can start sharing the slide with the sound on. Just a minute, share screen, here we are. This is what we want, and we want the sound on. So here we go.
Hello everyone, we are Stella and Veronica, and we're going to talk about our work on tattoos as identity markers in women living with two illnesses, breast cancer and endometriosis. So just a little bit of background to the conditions. We can go to the next slide. Yes, breast cancer is of course very well known. It's one of the most common cancers, accounts for 15% of the cancer cases, and it's got a high level of public awareness, which leads to hypervisibility and commodification of many aspects of the condition. On the other hand, endometriosis is a gynecological condition which causes, amongst many other symptoms, severe pain. Is believed to affect 1 in 10 women, and yet it has a diagnosis delay of 7.5 years on average, although I've never met a woman who's been diagnosed in less than 10 years. But because of its association with the menstrual cycle and the difficulty in articulated symptoms, the taboo associated with menstruation, it's very common to find that women feel that their pain is normalized and dismissed, even misdiagnosed. So this leads to a sense of disempowerment, alienation, and invisibility. Next slide, please. So we decided to focus on various semiotic devices that women with both conditions have, and focused on tattoos in particular. We found that tattoos are very interesting semiotic devices, and they have gone from having a utilitarian function, saying as radiotherapy marks in cases of cancer, to identity performative devices, mostly in the cases of breast cancer survivors. Our interest in tattoos is that they are something that can help us be in contact with other people and with ourselves, and they show not only the way in which the sick person experiences their bodies, but also what should be matters of concern and action perceived by the wearers. So in that way, they have an emancipatory potential. So in our work, we see tattoos as vehicles for self-expression, commemoration, community building, and social commentary. So in this slide, we collected a number of tattoos from different platforms, such as Instagram, Pinterest, using the search phrase hashtags breast cancer or endometriosis and tattoos. We found, well, we had a corpus of, we found over 1,000 images, but we focused on 61 tattoos and the comments next to the tattoos. And after identifying them, naming, categorizing both the visual and the linguistic elements, we were able to answer the following 2 research questions. What identities these tattoos construct for the wearer? And in line with today's theme, in what ways they can be seen to challenge patriarchal and normative discourses.
We would like to draw on 3 identities that we've identified in our sample. By far the most common is an identity for the tattoo wearer that draws on domains of war or more generally fighting. So we've given a cross section here. Now this we see it as a very agentive and resistant identity of the woman living with the illness. As you can see from the examples, there's lots of recontextualization and appropriation of images and symbols that have to do with war, such as World War II Rosie the Riveter or the iconic Iwo Jima image. So also symbols to do with the military, like the dog tag, and then we have boxing gloves for fighting more generally. In terms of the language, we have lots of lexis, words that draws on the field of, fighter, hero, battle, warrior, etc. We also find quite a few expletives, which culturally have, at least historically, been connoted as masculine. And the endo tattoos in particular give us lots of variations of the words strong and strength. So we argue that what we see here is a very traditional femininity, as indicated by the floral decorations, the heart shapes, the pink, but it is mixed with equally traditionally masculine symbols. And that we see as subverting traditional discourses of womanhood and pain. But it's also worth noting that these images do conform to a currently dominant health discourse that asks people with a condition to fight on and not give up and think positive. Another field, another identity being constructed is that of a religious person. So we have quotes from the Bible, we have religious symbols such as praying hands and rosaries. We have a cross with an endo ribbon, and in the comment that the woman posted alongside that image, she titled that comment, "My Cross to Bear." So what we have here, by contrast, is a non-agentive and accepting identity. And this, we could argue, adheres to traditional discourses of womanhood and pain, but reversely, it subverts dominant health discourse that asks women to fight and think positive. Finally, 2 identities that we see as subversive. The first, we've labeled despair. What you see in this image is a quote from the song Chelsea Smile by heavy metal band Bring Me the Horizon. I'll play just the sound so that you get an idea of what kind of music we're talking about. Yep, that should work, hopefully. Let's see. Okay, you get the idea, I reckon. So we have aggression there, we have nihilism in the lyrics, and we have despair as well. So it's really sitting with the unbearability of pain and grief as well. Very different from that, our final example. This is a tattoo that shows the chemical formula for cancer drug Herceptin. And the woman who posted that said, "I'm not a pink ribbon kind of girl. I'm actually quite against it." So she chooses rationality, understanding the chemical impact of the drugs on her body, an equally subversive identity, we would argue. So we see that tattoos allow people to express their identities and their experiences of illness through their bodies. But it also, because these are shared, this also allows members of a subculture, quote, a sense that they have found people who are like them and not like everyone else, because they live with certain conditions. But within the community of women living with the conditions, we also have subversive discourses and identities. And we would say that tattoos serve as, quote, a canvas to record the struggles between conformity and resistance. So we have this combination of traditionally feminine and masculine semiotics, which certainly started out as emancipatory, but we see that fast being conventionalized. We are interested in the hypervisibility of breast cancer, including tattoos, because on the one hand, that does tie in with the status of women in patriarchal societies, in that it reconstructs women as the visible, decorated, adorned, even garish gender. But it does not tie in with another conception of womanhood, which is women as the demure, silent, and subdued gender.
And especially in the case of endometriosis, where most medical specialists, gynecologists tend to be male, we feel that tattoos are a way of expressing the male control over women's bodies and women's understanding of the condition. This is evidence in the normalization reported by women, especially, like I said, in the case of endometriosis. We also find that women experience different identities depending on how close they are to a specific aspect of, say, treatment, consequences, or pain in themselves. If a woman is in pain, at the moment in which she is in pain, we find that she will probably conform to the or perform the identity of even the religious identity in praying for the pain to go away soon. But then in other aspects to do more with the social aspects, with fighting for visibility, with fighting against infertility caused by a condition like endometriosis, for example, we have a more fighter identity. So we have a fluidity in there. And I can't see the last comment because
we made the chat point there that the subversive identities, that subversion is not necessarily the same thing as empowerment. So that is just something to think about, we think. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a fast wrap up. Thank you both, Veronica and Stella, and talking about tattoos and sharing that experience, so the experience of the women. I'd now like to introduce our final panelist, is my friend Julia from the world of dance. And with that, be ready to stand up, everyone, because she's going to start it with a little bit of movement. So Julia, over to you.
Right. Thank you, Jamie Callahan. And by the way, Jamie and I met in the West Coast Swing community. And I thank you very much for inviting me to participate. What is West Coast Swing, first of all? West Coast Swing in the 21st century is a global dance phenomenon that have pockets everywhere in the world. There are pockets of West Coast Swing community which started in the United States, all over, Korea, Switzerland, Sweden, Japan, and a lot of the Western European countries. I like to call West Coast Swing dance the modern / interpretive dance of social dances. It is an improvised partner dance between two people where the primary physical connection is between the leader's left hand and the follower's right hand. It is called an educated dance form because there are basic patterns that are taught to all participants. Within the framework of these patterns, there are limitless opportunities to improvise. Not only is there a conversation happening between the two dancers, there's also a conversation going on with the music. Each dancer has his or her own unique way of interpreting the music. The basic footwork is walk, walk, triple step, and we're all gonna actually do that. So I would love for everybody to stand up for a moment and take a big breath. What I would like you to do is just plant your feet sort of in wider than shoulder width apart so that you feel like you have a nice wide base, and you're going to split your weight between both feet. You're going to bend your knees, just soften those knees, take a big inhale and reach up towards the ceiling, and take a big exhale and relax down. And you can sort of shift your weight side to side. A big inhale and a big exhale. All right, what I want you to do is I want you to put your feet together. I'm going to back up a little bit. I hope you can still hear me well, so you can see my feet. We're going to do a basic walking pattern, and so for you to embody this experience and then watch the professional dancers that we're going to see in these videos that we'll present, will give you sort of appreciation of how sophisticated they take the simple walking pattern. So what I want you to do is I want you to start walking in place, and I want you to imagine that the bottom of your feet have Velcro on the bottom, and that you are rolling through your feet, toe ball heel, toe ball heel, toe ball heel, and allowing that to sort of resonate in the rest of the body. And what I want you to do now that we're walking and walking, I want you to walk, walk, and then you're going to walk in a triple rhythm. So we're going to go walk, 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 walk. And doesn't matter which leg foot you're starting on. Walk, 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 walk. Again, walk, 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 walk. And I'd love to take you through a dance class or West Coast swing, but we don't have time. So if you'd like to sit down, you can sit down or keep walk, walk, triple stepping, triple stepping. Unfortunately, I don't have also time to talk about the history of the dance, but I think it's important for you to know that West Coast swing evolved from the swing dancing of the 1930s and 40s in the United States. And let's just say that Lindy Hop is the grandmother of West Coast swing dance. Oh, good. I'm glad you queued that up. Excellent. We're going to watch 3 videos of professional West Coast swing dancers that represent the evolution of the dance since the 1990s to the present. There has been a dramatic transformation in the past 20 years. Because of the way women began to assert themselves and challenge the patriarchal norms, the dance today truly reflects the demand for more equality. If dance is a microcosm of culture, West Coast swing dancers embody the shift in cultural and social norms of the 21st century. In the 1990s, which this clip is from, leaders who were all men talked and women followers listened. Followers did what they were told. There was very little wiggle room, so the opportunity for self-expression could be done in very subtle ways. So you will watch Brandy embellish her upper body with movement and syncopate her feet outside of that walk, walk, triple step rhythm. Women followers and their voices, their creativity, their contribution to the dialogue was strictly controlled and managed by the leaders who, again, were all men. In fact, the top male pros and teachers in the business used to boast that the social dance floor was the last bastion of male chauvinism, and they were proud of that. And they used to share that in lessons, by the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch this clip. Now, the only time that Brandy has an opportunity or even tries to take an opportunity to do something for herself as a response to his controlling the patterns in the dance is one little, and I'll try and point that out by just saying there, and hopefully you'll be able to hear me. But we're going to watch this clip in its entirety, and then we'll move on. You can go ahead and play. So it's ever so brief, and actually she tries to add an extra turn and he pulls her right out of it because he has his own agenda and keeps it right on track. So I think we can probably, if we're short on time, how am I doing on time, by the way? Can someone give me like a little time check?
You're short on time. You've got
we got 2 more
minutes left.
All right, so let's go ahead and go to the next clip. All right, so in the later part of the 20th century into the 21st century, there was an influx of talented women solo dancers who joined the community. These women first began using subversive tactics in order to gain more freedom and expressivity. One of those tactics was actually called hijacking the lead. So these followers would interrupt the leader's roadmap, if you will, and suggest maybe even demand a say in how and where the partnership was going. And their tenacity paid off. Leaders who began listening more intently and who were receptive to the incredible artistry and expressiveness, ingenuity and innovation of their followers were the ones who were actually starting to win competition. So this is a partnership between Marcus and Tren. They are professional West Coast swing dancers in the Washington, D.C. area. And we are going to see Tren really insert her expression and her talking in the conversation is going to be apparent. Whoops. And I'm going to, whoops, here we go. And what I'm probably going to do, if you can still hear me. So were you able to hear me when I actually commented when the video was playing? Is that because
yes.
I'll do the same. I'll try and do the same thing here. I'm going to actually point out. I'll just say there, and we'll see where Tren has moments that Marcus really give her to contribute to basically contribute to the conversation. He's still leading. She's still following. And here we go. All right, so she had a moment where she wanted to interpret the rhythm in the song, and he went ahead and allowed her to do that. And continue. Okay, and right there, so what you're going to notice as when she stands up is he is quite surprised at what has just happened. He's given her an opportunity to come towards the audience and express herself, and she actually backleads herself backwards in a split, and he helps her stand up. So let's continue the video. And we'll just stop there. So you can see that he expresses, few, I didn't drop her, and then gives her a moment. She lets go of him, and he gives her some more space and breathing room to contribute again to this more egalitarian conversation. So the last video, we're going to go to the last video. And finally, so with the influx of the women's voices and the considerable influence of the LGBTQ community, actually, the third video represents where we are going in West Coast Swing, the degendering of leader and follower roles. In fact, participants in all workshops and lessons now are referred to as leaders and followers, not men and women. This dance is in a sense leaderless. The two women are constantly going back and forth and actually sharing roles. And what I'm going to try and do is you're just going to go there when the women actually change roles in the dance. The dance is chock full of magical moments, and the exchange of ideas is rich and imaginative. So here we go.
Call it magic. Call it true. Call it magic.
Switch right there. All right, so the woman who had her back to us was starting the lead, and now the other woman is taking over. Here we go.
I'm with you, and I just got broken.
And again, so they've just switched twice. If you were able to pick up that last one, I didn't point it out. And we'll just watch another like 10-15 seconds, and then
next to you. And I don't
Thank you very much. So it's been fascinating to be a part of this experience. How are we doing? Can I wrap it up? 10
Yes,
seconds?
thank you. You're like over time. I need to pull you out of there.
All right, thanks very much.
I didn't mean that quite abrupt. You could have given like a really quick wrap up of the transformation of the dance.
Very quick wrap up. Yeah. Well, it's been a fascinating and I believe that the evolution has actually accelerated with what's going on again around the world, and so we are very fortunate to be in a social dance community that is really truly looking and questioning our social norms. And moving that even more forward into this idea of degendering the roles completely. So, all right, thanks so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Julia. So I'm going to share screen and we're going to move on to the next portion of the presentation for us today, the webinar. Again, I want to thank all of the presenters. We had Sharon, Tanya, Eliana, and Alexandra, Claire, Veronica, and Stella, and Julia. The next thing that we'd like you to do is to get engaged with the chat. So we're going to ask you all to take a little bit of time to reflect, and in the chat or the Padlet, and Kat said she would share the Padlet because I'm technologically challenged when it comes to Padlet. In either the chat or the Padlet, reflect on and respond. What are some ways in which you have communicated with women in resistance to patriarchal norm? So take about 2 or 3 minutes to reflect on that and post your thoughts. And the new Padlet address is in the chat box if you're looking for it. Oh, another dancer. Julia, we're not alone. Yes.
That's wonderful.
So we're sharing the Padlet screen so you have a chance to see some of the stuff that's going up. I have to tell you all, thank you. I've been in some other workshops where Padlet has been used, and there hasn't been this much activity on them. So thank you all. I'm going to give you one more minute to put up your ideas, and then I'm going to transition over to Carol, and we'll have who will then turn it over to the textiles team to begin our narrative, our discussion session, with a minute or two of their reflections on your reflections regarding textiles and your voice within textiles. So as we're chatting, as we're moving on into the discussion and Q&A, feel free to keep up with the Padlet. That's great. I'm going to turn it over to Carol now. Carol, I'm going to turn off my video and my mic and hand it over to you. Would you like?
Okay, thank you.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah, am I? Just wait for the transition. Oh, here we are. This is fantastic. Thank you, Kat, who's in charge of sharing this, the other Padlet that Tanya and Ariana and Alexandra have been working on whilst everybody else has been presenting. So we have about 5 to 10 minutes, probably more between, closer to 5 probably than 10 for Tanya and colleagues. Would you like to kind of share your responses to the images that that people have been sending in during the session?
Can we share the Padlet, Kat?
Yeah,
Thank you.
is, yeah.
We were discussing with Eliana if we were going to take the challenge of actually organize this, and we thought it was best to leave it as a kind of as a patchwork and see the multiple how the multiple textiles that are being shared with all of us, and how this language is actually as intimate as we can see. So the houses, the how many closets have we see of our colleagues, for example, and how textile can give us the opportunity to actually get into who we are and how these things represent us. So we actually don't have much more than that, but we want you to look at the Padlet, Kat, if we can move downwards and show the different images of clothes that and how when we see those clothes we actually can imagine someone wearing them, and how worn clothes have a different texture than those that one see in a store, and the use of the clothes is also remembering the bodies that these clothes have. So this is what I would like to share. I was very impressed to see the little sewing boxes and the boxes inside the closets. That was very moving for me to see how textiles are actually surrounding us, and how that tells a lot about us, and to understand them as a language, not just as something that is fixed, but it's actually something that communicates all the time. I don't know if Eliana or Alexandra say something.
Yeah, and it's something that connects us too. I think it's amazing how can we see how the questions could talk to you and tell you something about your daily life, and we are really thankful for letting us go into your places, knowing a bit more of your life or your textile life, and I'm really amazed by all the pictures and by all the stories, the small stories that are with the objects that you sent us. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for all the pictures that you sent and the opportunity that you give us to engage with all your material and textile, all the objects and gifts that you have. So thank you. Thank you so much for that.
More than giving a lecture or giving you some fixed ideas, we wanted you to feel that textile was actually a language that you could talk to, and how that tells things about who we are as humanity, but also how femininity is actually very much present in that idea of human and more than human in this case.
Great, thank you, Tanya, Liana, and Alexandra. That is it's wonderful, and it really is kind of very different practice to the one I think most of us probably at this webinar are in management schools or business schools, and this is not something we're used to doing. But I think it's fantastic, and you've really your feedback there and your communication of what was presented is really helpful. I won't speak anymore. My role now is to commence the Q&A, and there have been questions that have been coming in as the seminar has been progressing. The first one comes from Mark Gatto, and it's for Claire. Question: thank you for your fascinating talk, Claire. What do you feel might be our contemporary artifacts in the context of the digital world, and how are these being edited in real time to maintain masculine discourses?
Okay, thanks for that question, Mark. I'm also really fascinated by this idea of contemporary artifacts, although I'm not by any stretch of the imagination a digital scholar. And one of the things related to that kind of second part of your question about Zuckerberg, who are people who are dominating and manipulating common discourse around polarization, is probably a bit more of a kind of very specific example to some of my research that I've been conducting on death. But I suppose what fascinates me about our collective legacy is how social media and users of social media start to police our legacy once we're dead. So you can leave a kind of sort of a legacy caretaker for Facebook who will look after and control your page, but that's lovely in many ways. It's not without its problems. It's not without its gender dynamics. Someone will then kind of adjudicate what is left in terms of your legacy and what is deleted. And I find how potentially ephemeral some things like social media are to be really interesting and quite obviously gendered. But that was the thing that occurred to me, is that kind of sort of post-mortem, what sort of legacies are left. I suppose that in another way speaks quite clearly to what I was saying about Hatshepsut and how her legacy was kind of edited and manipulated and eroded. So I'm not sure that takes the question in the place that you perhaps intended, but that was my initial thoughts on it.
Great, thank you, Claire. Now we have a question for Veronica and Stella. Thank you for a brilliant talk. Do you know if the subversive tattoos were placed in highly visible or hidden places? The final tattoo made me think of Holocaust survivor tattoos and the sense of collective solidarity survivors found in sharing their pain and suffering when revealing their tattoos. I wonder if this applies to women's experiences with endometriosis.
The tattoo with the Chelsea Smile song was quite a big one because it had the lyrics of the song, and I believe that's placed in at the back, in the lower back. That's how I understood the question, where in the body the tattoo is placed. Yeah, am I correct in thinking that?
No, I think they mean in general, and then the last tattoo I think refers to the chemical formula, if I understand that correctly, because that was the last one we showed.
Yes, it was about the last tattoo, I think.
Yeah, that was the one of the formula. So in terms of how visible the tattoos are, I mean, depends obviously on size. A lot of it is on arms. So this part of the inner forearm, really, where I have my only tattoo, actually.
Well, yeah.
Shoulders, neck. There are very large tattoos. For instance, the cross with the endo ribbon I showed, that goes all the side of the woman's body. So that's extremely large, you know, but we find quite a few in neck, shoulders, which depending on the season can be exposed. So apart from the very large ones, I think they are mostly visible. Yes.
Stella, did you want to come in there and say something? Or no?
Sorry,
No.
I'm fine. I was just adding your leg area as well, so quite visible. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And there was the request from the textiles team if they could decipher the code for us, please.
That's a very interesting question, because if someone in the audience knows how to knit crochet, she might decipher the code. This is a graphic, a pattern of one of these granny squares that is used to make a patchwork of crochet. I don't know if you have seen it. It's a blanket with small squares of knitted in crochet, crocheted. And so this is, if someone is able to read that, is because she knows how to, she or he knows how to do crochet. But there are other ways of also, or other patterns that also have code. So for example, knitting with 2 needles has also visual patterns. That's the one on the right. So each one of those things is meant to be, we call it punto, a point. I don't know how it's in English, but we call it a stitch. Thank you. Each one of those images, little images, like the little chains that you see there, it's one type of stitch, and the ones that have a line and a little and it's crossed with another line, that's another stitch. So this is a granny square, and if someone in the audience knows how to knit crochet, she or he will for sure know this was that.
With Helen Charlton is one person who knows what the code was, so she's one of the crocheters in the room today. Now we have another question, for actually not addressed to anybody in particular, but wondering if any of the speakers have thoughts about the way teen girls or young women portray themselves on social media and the impact this has on this whole topic of challenge the patriarchy. Is it setting us back or empowering?
Yeah, I read that question. That made me actually think of a paper by linguist Ruth Page, who looks at ugly selfies on Snapchat. I mean, it's very difficult to collect Snapchat data for obvious reasons, but she put herself through it. And she really looks at when young women post, deliberately ugly or grotesque photos of themselves, and the comments they write around that. So that strikes me as a subversive thing to do, really. So that may be worth checking out if people are interested. Her name's Ruth Page, of the linguist who did that.
Thank you, Veronica.
There's also the work of Angela McRobbie on Notes on the Perfect, who looks at neoliberalism and post-feminism, and looks at, for example, the young women who have died, constructed around social media. So for example, Peaches Geldof and the social media portrayal of the perfect life. And also Ros Gill, I would recommend, in looking at neoliberalism and social media.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you. Gosh, the questions are coming in. I'm struggling to keep up with them now. Another quick one for Veronica and Stella. How prevalent is tattooing of surgery scars? Are you aware of that?
We saw quite a few tattoos used for breast cancer surgery scars. Not so much in endometriosis, but then it's a completely different kind of procedure. Endometriosis tends to be laparoscopic, and so it's not as visible as it is for breast cancer.
Now on for Sharon, Mavin. How responsible is the media for the continued pejorative construction of women in management?
Well, really, it should be you and I, Carol. Carol and I, with Valerie Anderson, have had a recent publication outlining our views on this, using a headline of "Never mind Brexit, how about Legxit?" focusing on Nicola Sturgeon and our Prime Minister at the time. And we have made very clear that we see the media as responsible for portraying the Queen Bee, who are up for to have their legs chopped off, basically, by showing their legs on the front page of newspapers that travels into daytime TV, with an entire gendered debate on This Morning, into Twitter, and into, excuse me, into Parliament. Carol?
Yeah. Yes, I haven't got my academic head on. I've got my TV host head on at the moment. But yes, and I think that the notion of discourses travelling is something we were trying to communicate in that paper. A discursive event. So we position this photograph as a discursive event which travelled between different sources of media, and the disempowering, and we didn't use the notion of symbolic violence, but that indeed was, no matter what your politics is or was at the time, this kind of the portrayal of these women was a form of symbolic violence. So yeah. I'm just moving here between chat and Q&A. Another one for Sharon. What do we do about the problem that are queen bees?
First of all, stop using the language. Secondly, stop judging women for not behaving in particular ways that we expect them to behave, where we don't expect men to behave in those ways. That would be my plea, really, is to stop judging women in different ways that we judge women that we judge men in positions of high authority, and to become aware of when we judge women and how we judge women, and to just stop using the language. Why do we continue exploring what instead of why?
Thank you. Final question, I think, before we move on. Jamie's going to give a summary of the comments on the second Padlet. But final question to panelists in general. Thank you. I'd be interested to hear more about panelists' views on the relationship between subversion and empowerment, as noted by Veronica in her closing comment.
Yes, so what we meant by that is we were thinking of the of this identity of despair, aggression, nihilism, I think, is the sitting with the grief and the unbearable pain, etc., which can be subversive, certainly, but it's hard to see that as anything really that gives women more agency or more power or more self-determination, really. So I think it's important to remember that subversion doesn't necessarily mean empowerment in that sense.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an important point. Just there's a final question, which is more of a comment, but I think that leads us then nicely to Jamie's wrapping up of the Padlet. Not a question, but I'm just reflecting on all of the pieces today and seeing threads across. I wonder about the artifacts of women leaders, particularly thinking about Sharon's piece. What if there was dance, remembering Theresa May being ridiculed for her dancing? What textiles on their bodies, what visible or invisible tattoos, judgments made on women leaders according to embodiment? So that was a comment, I think, rather than a question, unless anybody wants to respond to that, of course.
Fantastic idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do an exercise with students sometimes where they watch a video of an interview with Christine Lagarde, and I try to get at the multimodality, not just at what she says and the colors. And very often students need a little nudge to say, well, what about her jewelry? What about her makeup? What about her clothes? All these are semiotic systems, and they tie in with how she uses language in communicating a certain serious professional identity that is, of course, also gendered. So I think that's always worth remembering, really.
Thank you. Thanks, Veronica. So, Jamie, can I pass it over to you again? You've been looking at the Padlet and the comments on that.
Sure, thank you. The engagement has just been phenomenal, and we really want to thank you all for joining us in the way that you have. And just in general, some of the things that I was seeing as you were putting things into the Padlet, there's so much there. So this is obviously just a real quick overview, but there were a lot of comments about speaking truth to power. So in other words, speaking up, speaking against, speaking for. So in spaces that are masculine, or in spaces where there was an opportunity to speak up for other women, if there was an opportunity to speak against things that men were saying, or speaking for different kinds of issues and commentary. So there was a lot of that speaking truth to power. There also was a lot of speaking truth around taboo subjects. So one of the ways to disrupt a lot of that, you were talking about speaking of things like menstrual cycles, speaking of menopause, speaking of childbirth. So speaking of those things that are considered feminine, but speaking about them openly and without shame in public spaces, making men sometimes uncomfortable. And the other thing that I thought was a lot of people talked about setting up groups. And so an area that we didn't touch on what we were working on that much, with the exception of Tanya, Eliana, and Alexandra talking about the spaces in which our textiles influence our lives. So a lot of people talked about spaces in terms of spaces of engagement. So I saw things around solidarity in women's only spaces, and also subversion of women engaging in women's work in men's spaces. So there's so much more in this. We could actually spend time. We might want to think about this, team, spend more time and kind of doing this analyzing where people are coming from. But we only have about 3 minutes left in this particular session. And we really wanted to take some time at the end to thank you so much for coming. We wanted to do something different that gave you a more visceral experience of what it meant for women to have voice, and have women engage their voices in different ways in a very male-dominated world that we live in. And so we hope that you walk away from this with this webinar with a different sense of thinking about where your voice might be, and how you might amplify the voices of the women in your lives. So with that, thank you very much. And a big thank you to all of our panelists. We really appreciate you trusting us to kind of do this weird thing and coming and joining us and sharing your thoughts and your ideas and your time with us. So thank you.
And thank you very much to the CMS In Touch team who have been organising this, and without whom this would not have taken place. So thank you.
Exactly. My remiss. Thank you.
Thanks so much for it. Didn't feel like a webinar, it felt like an experience in my little office cupboard here. So it was absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure that everyone really enjoyed it. So our time's coming to an end, and I think we could probably go on for hours, but I guess we have to go back to our to our lives. So just to remind you that we've got events coming up in the In Touch calendar. Our next event really follows on from this one perfectly. It's on embodying methods in management and organisations before, during and after COVID-19. And then we have our next interactive PDW on the 24th of February about publishing critical work in ephemera. So if you wish to register for those events, just go to our Eventbrite webpage. We've put the link into the chat. And finally, if you're inspired or motivated to run your own webinar with us, please just get in touch with us. We're delighted to welcome any kind of format or mode that you wish to explore with the CMS community. So get in touch with us at cmswebinars@gmail.com. In the meantime, it just leaves me for me to say thank you so much to Carol, Jamie, and the speakers. It was an absolutely fantastic webinar. And thank you for joining us, everyone. I know it's a very busy time for everyone, but I hope you've really enjoyed it, and we'll all see you very soon. Bye now.